Oh, I didn't write a title for myself.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Adcast, a podcast for the study of modern visual culture. I am your magnificent Steiner, Renu.
And I'm your mechanically minded detective on the hunt for criminals, Soup.
This week, AT stands for Octung, baby, because we'll be talking about Naoki Urasawa's Monster. But before we get into that, what have we been up to?
That is a good question. I have not been up to too terribly much. I'm sure that's something that you hear quite a bit from me. I am recording this on a new microphone. I decided to get myself a new microphone for Christmas because I have been recording the podcast on the other one for a very long time. I looked, and I think I got that mic like maybe a year into the podcast. So this is the first time I've really upgraded since then. I think.
Wow.
Yeah. So if
I'm still using the same one.
yeah, I was say if I sound a little different, that's why. I'm not even sure if the difference is going to be that perceptible, to be honest. Like the mic I had already was like fine, right? It worked fine. This one, the only thing that it really should do is it should somewhat like reduce the effect of the bad habits I have when I speak. So
Like what?
So, like, you know, like sibilance, like the really harsh S sound,
Yeah.
is generally should be a little bit softer, and the plosives should be a little bit softer as well. The like puh sounds.
I can kind of hear that. Yeah.
Although also like at the same time, right? If I just really enunciate too hard on something, it's still not gonna completely solve it, right? But anyway, so yeah. Other than that, like, not much. I will be going to, I'll be going. This episode will come out, and I'll have come back from a little Christmas vacation, up to Oregon. Oregon. Yeah. Other than that, I've been playing a lot of video games. I recently started playing games again, which is really fun because normally I'm the kind of person that plays like one game sort of at a time as a sort of like main game, and then I'll play other games like very infrequently, and that will usually be something that is a multiplayer or otherwise kind of game, like, you know, like Final Fantasy 14 or Apex Legends, but I've been playing like different titles, little like smaller games, and that's been really nice. That's just been healing me in a certain way.
Oh, healing you.
Yeah, I needed some time just to play some video games, you know?
Yeah, no, I get that. I also I like to turn to really small, like little indie experiences when I feel like I need my gaming heart to be healed too. There's something really pleasant about them, like it's like, oh, look at this nice little thing that someone made, and it's so like pure and not tainted by, I don't know, corporate capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, a smaller experience is always just going to be a little nicer in many different regards. So what about you? What have you been up to?
I have been gearing up for holiday stuff and convention stuff. I have one winter convention that I'm doing kind of after New Year's. Other than that, not too much outside of that. I've been doing art for people because my wallet's a little tight this year. So
oh god. Yeah, it'd be like that.
Yeah, it's like I'm both short on time and money, but you know, I think I can squeeze my time a little more effectively than I can my wallet right now.
You know what? That's fair. As long as you are alive.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, we're functioning. We're gonna make it happen. Yeah, that's basically all I've been up to.
I mean, to be fair, like, I think for the holiday season, it's not like super exciting stuff really happens before the holidays. Everything is just kind of leading up to that point. So, like, for me personally, like, I can't think about anything that I've been doing because I'm mostly just thinking ahead to like what I will be doing.
Yeah, same.
Which is also really funny because this episode will come out after Christmas. When I think about it,
we've totally done the holiday stuff already. Don't worry about it.
We've done it already, and it was great. I just got back, and I had a great time. Hopefully,
we saw our families. They were lovely. There were absolutely no fights whatsoever, and we've come back refreshed, and we didn't sap all of our energy over the vacation or anything.
Right. Most
that's how holidays
not.
go, right?
All right, well, shall we talk about Monster then? Shall we just get right into it?
Yes, I'm so excited.
Nice. Yeah, we've been trying to record this episode for a while now, but it took a long time for me to be able to sit down and like crack into Monster, just because it's pretty long and you have to adjust yourself a little bit when you initially start reading it. Because it, obviously it has a bit of an older art style. You might be into it, you might not. But after you've read a couple of chapters, you like really get into it. But it's kind of like wading into a cold pool, especially for something as prestigious as Monster. I feel like sometimes you really have to like psych yourself up to read something that is very well regarded, because you're like, oh, I have to take it in, right? I have to experience this properly.
I think you hit the nail on the head perfectly in describing that feeling, because I also felt the same way, even though this isn't my first experience with the storyline of Monster. I first watched the anime a long time ago, and then this is my first time like sitting down and properly reading it. And I also had that mindset of like, I've been reading like tons of other stuff.
I've been reading garbage, right?
Right.
I gotta recalibrate.
That's exactly it. To be completely frank, we've probably both just been reading garbage as like comfort food, right? Because like we're stressed with our daily lives. We're like, oh, we want some garbage escapism.
Right. I don't want to think about things.
Exactly.
I don't want to do my job.
So you actually have to, you like you said, you have to put yourself in the right mindset to be able to properly enjoy something like this. And it does take a couple chapters, but thankfully, like, I think the story is so riveting that once the setup is there, you just plow forward. There were times reading this manga that I was just like, next chapter. I just kept going because it was like, I just need to find out the next thing, right, that's gonna happen.
Yeah, no, 100%. I was really prepared to struggle a little bit, like, when I read a really complicated novel. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Something that has a lot of like meat to it. And
yeah,
of course, that is a thing where I definitely struggled a little bit at the beginning to kind of get a sense of what the themes were supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily, it really, all of that stuff just kind of like fades away like fairly quickly. You get really into the world and the story of Monster, and you become very engaged with it. And by the end, all of the themes kind of present themselves to you in a very clear way. Which, like, yeah, I mean, honestly, I had never really, I did not know anything about Monster before I started reading it.
Really? Okay, that's awesome.
I was gonna say, somehow for the last 20 some years, I have avoided spoilers. I did not know pretty much anything about it other than like maybe the basic premise.
I think that's actually kind of a result of how the community has treated Monster in general. It's like, I'm not sure if it's like necessarily out of respect for the story or what it is, but like, just, even though I've experienced it already, having, having that knowledge in my mind, I haven't seen many spoilers out there, like, hardly at all. And it's not like this series isn't necessarily talked about, but I think it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just that highly regarded that people are like, let's just keep that on down low. I don't know.
I feel like, to begin with, it kind of helps that it's an older series, right?
That's true.
Was serialized and finished up largely before, I would say, Western anime communities began to form, especially those that are on the internet. So a lot of discussion of Monster necessarily is probably going to be more niche, and it's going to be more like locked away. It's going to be more ephemeral. There probably are, I say there probably are, there almost certainly are many videos and essays dissecting it, but it's not the kind of thing you see, because it's not like the thing of the moment, right? It is one of those pieces that sort of exist, and people know that it exists. People know that it's good, and they may not know why, because they've never experienced it. They just know that Naoki Urasawa is like a good mangaka, right?
Yeah, they might have heard of the title Monster or know of Urasawa, right. But yeah. Yeah, no, and that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk about this series, is because there might be people in our audience who haven't experienced the story yet, in which case, I kind of want to, like, when we intro the story, we'll, like, start with, like, the beginning stuff, of course, but then after that we'll clearly demarcate where we're gonna get into, like, pretty heavy spoiler territory, so that if, until that point, our discussion interests you enough to go read or watch Monster, then please, by all means, do so, because it is definitely a series worth experiencing. And what's really great about it is, if you like reading it, of course, the manga is excellent, but the anime as well is a pretty faithful adaptation. I really enjoyed it, and having read, experienced both, I think they're both good. So if you're an anime watcher or if you're a manga reader, either way, I would recommend checking it out if our discussion today interests you. But yeah, well, because it's such a plot-heavy, story, if you're interested in it, I don't want to, like, spoil everything for you, because then it might take the wind out of the sails, so to speak.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I would say that it is well worth a read. I think there is a very clear reason, reading Monster, why Naoki Urasawa is so well regarded. And the thing is, like, Monster is one of his earlier works, right? It's really the piece that, like, kind of vaulted him into the spotlight as a well-regarded mangaka, and his style only really evolves from here. I was honestly I wasn't sure how I would feel about it, right? I felt like it was going to be a bit of a slog, which obviously it did not turn out to be, but I was I was really ready for, like, 20 some years of, like, manga technique evolution to just sort of, like, bring me back to, like, when you play a game that came out for the PlayStation 1 and you're like, look, they're like little, like, Play-Doh people or whatever, right? They're kind of like, both in terms of, like, the graphical limitations and also in terms of the stylistic choices. A lot of older games can be inaccessible to people for, many different reasons. Right? And I felt like that was what was going to happen to me with Monster. I was like, the paneling is probably going to be, like, fine for the era, or whatever. But luckily, obviously, I'm here talking about it. I read all of it in, like, 3 days, so it's good, and I think that it is not that hard to get into, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, it doesn't, to me, feel like a piece that's dated. Of course, it has older sensibilities, just due to the fact that it was written, 20
it has that
some
classic
odd years
vibe
ago.
to it.
Right, exactly. It feels more classic than anything else. And it's also, I think it also helps that it takes place technically, in the past before it was even written, right? It takes place in 1986 and onward. So, it's a bit of a period piece as well, and that's why I feel like there's a bit of a timeless quality to it in that sense.
Yeah, and also like I think it is interesting because it is simultaneously timeless and also of the time, and you can really tell that because of the time period and the location that it's set in. But anyway, we'll get into all of that. So, Monster is a Japanese manga series. This is from Wikipedia, written and illustrated by Naoki Urasawa. I'm tipping my hand here. These are from like. There's no point in us coming up with a different summary for the essential facts of it, because like that is literally what Wikipedia is for. But I'm just gonna read this to you that we pirated off of Wikipedia. Monster is a Japanese manga series written and illustrated by Naoki Urasawa. It was published in Shogakukan in their seinen manga magazine Big Comic Original between 1994 and 2001. And this is the part where we will come up with whatever the hell for the summary. It is about a surgeon whose name is Kenzo Tenma, and he is a genius surgeon, and
surgeon.
He's a genius neuro brain surgeon, and he's got a beautiful life. He has a wonderful career ahead of him. The head of the hospital likes him. He is engaged to his daughter. The head of the hospital is like the hospital director's daughter, and everything is coming up Tenma. And then he is asked to do surgery on an opera singer instead of a random like Turkish man who was in the hospital, and he does that because the director tells him to, and as a result the opera singer lives but the Turkish man dies. And so the next day so he's like conflicted about this, and then the next day the wife and child of the Turkish man who died go to the hospital, and they start causing a ruckus, and she grabs Dr. Tenma and is like, how could you do this? Like, my husband was here first. If you had operated on him, he would have lived, right?
Yeah.
And Tenma's like really, really disturbed about this. He's like, oh geez, did I do a bad thing? Like, I'm a doctor, right? Like, what is the point of being a doctor? And then the next time a situation like that comes up, which is quite shortly, is when the mayor needs surgery. The mayor of I think they're in Dusseldorf to begin with, which was in West Germany. The story starts in 1986. That is before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Another child comes in who has been shot in the head as a result of this mysterious incident that happened where a shooting happened and killed a family, or two parents, and then like the child got shot, and then there was another child that's like in shock, and he's like, oh, okay, well, don't worry, kid, I'll save you. And the director is like, you gotta operate on the mayor, man. Like, we have to operate on the mayor. And he's like, no, I will operate on the child.
Yeah, Tenma.
And he does that. So the child survives, but the mayor dies. And he basically gets blackballed because of it. And so his engagement falls apart. His position at the hospital gets like really downgraded. And he becomes basically like a chump. And
yeah, basically his future, his shining career, his future at the hospital. Yeah, there's none, right? He's basically kind of cut out of the circle, so to speak.
Yep, and then the hospital director and all the surgeons who were bad-mouthing him die all of a sudden.
Yes,
three
of them die.
They die, and then he's like, "What?" And the police are like, "Dr. Tenma, we think it was you.
You looking awfully suspicious.
You looking
Tenma.
awfully
we
sussy.
heard some things happened, and you might have a grudge against these people."
And he's like, "No, man, I didn't do that." But it turns out it was the child. Dun, dun, dun.
The child he saved.
The monster he's unleashed upon the world. Dun dun dun.
So that's the beginning of the story.
That's the first like 5 chapters, and if that intrigues you, I will say it's very good, very well told story. It's also 160 like 1 or 2 chapters, so it's pretty long, but it is a complete work. And my God, I will say also this is something that I have noticed recently, where I've been playing games that have like definite endings, and I kind of missed having something that was like I didn't have to wait weekly for like the conclusion. I'm just like, okay, I read it, and it's over. The story is done. I got the whole thing. I got the whole experience. I don't want to wait for it.
Oh, me too. Yeah. I find myself really preferring that nowadays, which is, the exact antithesis to the model that we have now, which is like everyone is on a subscription, on a weekly update.
Right, everything has to go on forever.
Even games are released chapter by chapter. I'm like, please, where's my complete experience? I just want to binge
I just want the thing. I just want it to be done with. Yeah, I 100% agree. I have really come to appreciate, especially when a piece of media can land an ending, because sometimes they really can't. And but when they do, it's like, you're like, oh, it's so good, delicious. All the thematic meat has like come together, brilliant.
Yeah. I feel like for Monster, and I'm not entirely sure on how the production went, but the way that it feels as a reader is that it felt like he was able to just end it where he wanted to. So it doesn't feel like it's stretched too thin or that it's too rushed or anything like that. I think the pacing worked really well for the story, and he just was able to make the complete work that he wanted. At least that's how it feels to me.
That is definitely what I would say too, is it doesn't at any point really feel like a serialized like weekly series. It feels like a complete story, which is really nice.
It is nice.
So yeah, I mean, what do you want to talk about first? Should we mark the spoilers here and just say go read it, go watch it? Because I kind of want to get into the meat of
let's get into the meat. Yeah. So if you haven't experienced it yet and you're interested by what we've discussed so far, we're gonna move into spoiler territory now. If you would rather proceed without spoilers, I would highly recommend that you go experience the media, and then you can come back to the episode and comment and discuss with us. So let's get into it.
Scram, get out of here.
Oh, hey, don't
it.
say that. We love them.
If you haven't read Monster, what am I even to think of you?
Don't you do that. Don't guilt them.
All right.
So,
I will say that now that we're in spoiler territory, I will say that this story did not go where I thought it would go, sort of.
Sure.
There was a very definite period of time where I was on exactly the same page as Inspector Lunge. I don't actually know how you're supposed to pronounce his name. Because it's like lunge, but in German, right?
Yeah, how do you pronounce how maybe Google will tell us.
Maybe Google will tell us. German pronunciation. Let's see. Lunge? Maybe?
Lunge. I think that's what Google.
You know what? I'm gonna take the Lunge. So
is that what you found?
Yeah, that is also what the katakana says, which is my way of cheating.
Oh, okay.
So Inspector Lunge is a really interesting figure, and I was 100% on the same page as him for a while. Although by the time that he shows up and is like, "Oh, Johann is but an alter ego for Dr. Tenma for him to do his killings." At that point, you know definitively that is not true. But
yes.
for like quite a long time, I was like, oh, it's like that's what the twist is. He's an alter ego. He's like doing the killings himself. Like he's like, oh, how could you do this to me? And it created a split in his personality. And that is where I thought that the story would go. And then they resolved that like really fast. They're like 15, 20 chapters in. They're like, nah, he's real. And you're like, oh my god.
See, that's so funny because I was completely on the side of him being real the entire time.
I think the thing is that the depiction is ambiguous enough at the start to make you think
it
that.
is. Yeah, no,
right?
I
really
do love that
way.
you also thought that. Because I do think that he made it ambiguous on purpose.
Right. And I will also say that I'm glad that wasn't the story, because
it would have been awful.
So much less interesting than what we did get. And I will say what we did get was actually like bonkers. I was not I was not ready. I like really wasn't prepared for the places that this manga went, right? Cuz I was like, okay, like it's set in Germany, like before and after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It probably is like, you know, probably going to mention some of that stuff, but I don't think it's going to just be set dressing. But we went so much deeper into it than I thought we would.
Right.
It
was crazy.
Here's like the Czechoslovakian secret police and the far right contingent groups that still exist and like try to, you know, do their Nazi stuff.
Yeah,
right?
The neo-Nazis, and then was it and he even went into like the immigrant struggles, like really deep immigrant struggles of like the Turkish neighborhoods and all the other immigrants there too. It was like...
I totally was not prepared to have those the depictions of like all of the immigrants to Germany, specifically being like Turkish immigrants, having like the Turkish Quarter, you know, having the Vietnamese immigrants. I thought was really interesting. And yeah, I mean, I felt like it was very grounded and very in tune with the realities of a place like Germany, right?
Yeah,
I
would be so
ready for.
interested. Yeah. I would be so interested in seeing like an analysis of what it was like back then, because I'm not knowledgeable enough about this country in this time period, right? I only know like very general like world history around this time. So I'm really interested in seeing like how much of this like is accurate to that time period, because I imagine he did a butt ton of research in order to get this far detailed into it, right?
I mean, I would say that if you look at the 20th century, that was like the tail end of the 20th century. I would say there was quite a sort of neo-Nazi presence. I feel like culturally you can feel that.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And I would also say that the immigrants and the Turkish Quarter seem very... That just seems very, like, in line with what I would believe about Germany at the time. Like, immigrants have realistically always existed, and they've always kind of come from wherever. And, you know, it is not unusual for people to immigrate to Germany from, say, like, Turkey, right? And be treated in a way that they are different from Germans.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, the treatment of it in the story, all these different places and, you know, nationalities and whatnot, feels really grounded. It doesn't necessarily feel like, you know, someone who lives in a completely different continent stereotyping everyone that they come across, and you know,
right. And I would also say that in terms of the sort of immigrant populations, I think it is important that those populations are depicted in a story like this, because you really get this very broad depiction of what, you know, specifically of what like Germany at the time was like, where you have a bunch of neo-Nazis and then you have a bunch of the immigrants that just kind of like live there, right? And it's like both this depiction of most likely quite grounded and accurate depiction of what it was like in Germany at the time, and at the same time it gives you a wide variety of people to look at. I think that one of the things that I noticed while reading is that Naoki Urasawa is very, very good at like depicting people. They feel so like immediately fleshed out and so immediately real. And he builds a lot of characterization off of like very small, like little idiosyncrasies or like tics that people have, right?
Yeah.
So like Inspector Lunga's thing is that he does this like weird like hand motion to like physically record memories like he's a computer, right?
Yeah, like he's typing. Yeah.
You have the criminal psychologist who like records everything on tape recorders, and you have the detective who just like clips his nails all the time, right? It's just like these like little things that really give you like an inroad to understanding someone.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I would just say like and like obviously like if it was just the one thing, it would still be like flat, but
oh yeah,
there's still a lot of care taken and in crafting and depicting like nuanced depictions of people, right?
Yeah, no, I love the way that he portrays, because this story has so many characters, and
it really does.
It can be really like dizzying to try and keep up with everyone, but Urasawa just has this way of like, this is this person right here, this is that person right there, and you learn enough about them, and I think what's really great about the physical way that he portrays them is that not all of it has to be said. You know, you get a feel for their personality just by like these tiny little mannerisms that he depicts.
I think that that Naoki Urasawa has the sort of medium of manga and the rhythm of how to lay out panels effectively, just like really down. You can immediately see it, and you immediately get a sense for it, because he makes sure to show like the small moment by moment frames when the scene calls for it, and at the same time omits stuff that you don't need to see, stuff that you can infer or that doesn't need to be said, or stuff that can be up to interpretation, right? It's really good because you get a very physical sense of these characters from their little tiny mannerisms, and like where they're looking and how they react to things, and at the same time, because of all of that, you know, built up characterization, you know, Urasawa can omit panels of things happening and you understand what has happened in that time, right? One of my favorite depictions, I have two characters that I think are depicted just like really, really flawlessly. And one of them is Inspector Lunga. He really has the long play because he's like a prominent character kind of throughout the entire series.
It's a really, really long play.
But I really, really liked the way that his character was developed, because, you know, you see him and he's originally this kind of like, he's like a proto L, you know, from like Death Note, where he has this relentless, very intellectual, like almost terrifying at points antagonistic relationship with Dr. Tenma, and he is hot on the trail. He is so good at his job, right? Yeah. And you can see him, and you know, Urasawa always shows the little keyboard like emotions that he makes with his hands. And the one time he doesn't, the one time that his hands stay still, you notice it immediately. You're like, oh, okay, he did not do the thing, right? You feel that a change has happened in his character, right? And he goes and he's on his you know, his Czechoslovakian vacation, and he's like, I'll have a beer. Like, he's like, I'll have a coffee. No. Actually, I'm on vacation. I'll have a beer, right? And then immediately, as soon as he's like switching back into work mode, he's like, make that beer a coffee, right? He's like,
yeah.
You could, these small characterizations are just like they're so perfectly in line with the like weird idiosyncrasies of this like really strange detective guy, and. And then, like, at the end of the series, you kind of get an arc where this guy starts out, and he lives for his job, and not even necessarily to do well at his to do well in terms of like his like career path and all that, right? It's not like he's doing this so that he can get promoted. He he just wants to do the detective work. It's like it's the stuff that interests him. He's like, I'm only interested in solving this case. I like actually don't care what the other parts of it are, right? There's a very distinct part where he's like, I like don't care that you did a copycat murder and to like steal inheritance money. Like I really don't give a shit about that. I'm here for one thing, right? And and you get this picture of this guy who's so like devoted to his job because he like I wouldn't even say he cares about it. It feels like he's obsessed with it, right? To the detriment of everything in his personal life. And you see his wife and his daughter like leave him, and by the end he kind of becomes more sociable and more empathetic and more understanding, right? He's like, all right, Dr. Tenma, I guess you aren't a dissociative identity serial murderer. And you know, he's like, and he, you know, calls up his or he gets a call from his daughter and is like, you know, I've had a son, and he's like, can I see him, right? And you can feel this very palpable sense that he's changed as a character. And it's like, at the same time, I would say it's like not so obvious either. It's such a nuanced, subtle way of developing a character that you, if you weren't paying like super close attention, you might even miss it.
Yeah, I also love the treatment for his character. I mean, like, first of all, the way that he's so starkly portrayed is that you're surprised that he even has a family. Like, this man is so about his work.
You were surprised
I was shocked.
Like, you have the exact same perspective as his coworkers who are like, does he even, like, have to eat and sleep?
Yeah, right, exactly. Because you don't see him do any of that stuff until he's on vacation.
Right.
He's so, I don't know, almost... He's portrayed in a robotic way that he doesn't care that his wife has been cheating on him this whole time. He doesn't care that his daughter is pregnant. Like, he doesn't want to care about that stuff because he wants to care about his work. But then, like, slowly but surely through his involvement in this case with Tenma, with the people whom Tenma has met and whom he meets as a consequence, this very cold, icy detective, him little heart starts to just melt ever so slightly, right? And you really get to see it with his interactions with Grimmer. And I feel like that's so poignant because, you know, at the end, you know, who is he seeing? You know, he's at Grimmer's grave, sharing a beer with the guy, you know, and that's not something that that the detective in the beginning of the story would have ever done, you know. And I think that's such a huge, like a nice, wonderful way to wrap up his arc.
I would also say that I want to put a pin in this because I definitely want to return to this moment.
Yeah.
The other character who I think is so well portrayed in terms of the little mannerisms that they have is the other detective, Richard Brown, who shows up and he has this kind of like Clark Kent-y vibe to him, and he is, and this is funny because there's so many men in Naoki Urasawa's Monster that are like just so obsessed with doing their job that their families fall apart. Like it's not like just 3 or 4 guys, it's like 6 or 8.
Yes.
But I would say that Richard Brown is so well characterized because he is struggling with alcoholism, right?
Yeah.
And so every single time that he is given the choice to drink alcohol and he chooses to drink coffee instead, but like is a character choice, and at the same time you can see him physically struggling with that, like, and it's not even like you see his expression really where he's like, oh, I can't drink anymore, right? It's not so obvious necessarily, but it is so blindingly clear because it's like he sees 2 people drinking. He looks a little bit closer at 2 people drinking, and the only like panel you get is like of his throat, and he's like swallowing, he's drinking, he's like gulping.
Yes,
and
he's parched.
It's such a visceral like
Yes.
feeling that you get, that you're like, oh, this man wants a drink, right?
Right, but so it's also like, so not only is it like relatable and very visually like understandable, but it's also accurate to what alcoholism does. It makes you feel like your throat is dry when you're craving an alcoholic drink because you're so addicted to it. So it's I love the way that they characterize Richard in that sense too, because every time it comes up, it feels like a very
It is
like tense, palpable moment. You're like,
it is
no,
so
Richard,
tense.
Don't do it.
It is so tense, and the one time that he does order alcohol, because his life has basically like fallen apart at that point. You're like, oh god, like you can. It's like it's this sense of dread. But then he just pays for it and he walks out. He does not drink a single drop of it, and you're like,
You're like, Richard, we love you, Richard. This man loves his family. He wants to be with his family. He wants a chance to be with his daughter. This
is such a what I would say is a very proper big strength of Naoki Urasawa is he is so good at depicting people as humans, and it works so well for this story because it's like quite an adventure in a lot of ways, right? You know, Dr. Tenma goes around Europe, mostly Germany, but he, you know, ventures out into Czechoslovakia and stuff like that. And the sense that you get is that he meets a lot of people, and none of those encounters that he has ever feel like a throwaway encounter, right?
Yeah.
It always feels like he is stepping into someone's life, and through him, we get to step into someone's life, and we get to see like this small town that has problems, and he's, you know, gonna try to fix them. And you can tell that, you know, Dr. Tenma is a deeply empathetic man that cares so much about other people that he's willing to just like do surgery under the worst conditions possible so that people have a better chance at being alive. His philosophy at the outset of Monster being that all lives are equal.
Yeah.
It's like one thing to hear that someone say that, and it's another thing to see someone constantly put themselves out there in order to act upon that philosophy, right? Like, there are times when it is so disadvantageous for him to help somebody. He's like, I'm not gonna help a terrorist, right? But he does it anyway, right? He's like, you know, I'm not gonna help you because you're like my enemy, but he does it anyway, right? And you can tell it's because he cares so deeply about other people. And it works so well. And through him, you get to see so many different sides of people where like you get to see like all the care and the trauma that people have, even at the very beginning of the story when you have, you know, Adolf Juncker, right? He's like, you know, I helped you, and he's just talking to him as a person, and he's like, you know, Dr. Tenma, you saved my life, and in some ways, like I kind of regard you as a father figure now, right? You've kind of brought me back to life in a way, right? And you know, he kind of unpacks the trauma of like, well, I started stealing because you know, I grew up poor, and I had this clock that I really, really wanted. And
clock.
it sort of just manifested in these ways. And
and
really, you can see that he's just somebody that like really needed somebody to like listen to him and to care for him. And it makes it all the more tragic when he just gets fucking iced by Johan for having been there. And
then Tenma bought him a clock. He was on his way to give it to him.
And this is
man.
And this is the thing, is like, I feel like the characters and the story are so realistic and so grounded and so consistent in that a lot of the times when characters die, it's not for shock value, it's for some purpose serving the narrative, right? And a lot of times their problems haven't necessarily been resolved, but they have been worked on, right? It's not like their goals necessarily went unfulfilled, right? Like when Richard Brown gets killed, he has, you know, in many ways kind of overcome a lot of his problems, right? He's
Yeah.
kind of overcome his alcoholism, and obviously, like, that is a lifelong condition that you work on for the rest of your life. But I mean, technically speaking, he did that, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I would say is, like, you know, even when characters are being killed in this story, they're being treated with all of the respect and dignity and empathy that makes it feel like it matters, and it raises the stakes in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think a real effect that this ends up having is the way that Urasawa has crafted every single character, even all of the, you know, quote unquote NPCs or whatever, is that by the end of the story, when you get to see a lot of them, it's like he knows that you care about them because he cares about them too as the author, right? And when you get to see the little glimmers of them kind of like leading up to the climax of the story, or like at the end, you know, the epilogue parts of the story, it feels so satisfying. It's like, oh, look at this person. Oh, look at that person. Oh, I like you remember how much you care about all of these people throughout the story. And in reality, they could have ended up being treated like, you know, little cardboard cutouts, like, oh, Tenma visited this little rural town. Look, that's the doctor that he met. No. He helps them and he goes on his way. But no, you end up really, really caring about how these people turn out. and their reaction to certain news too, like when Tenma got arrested, was also really nice, because you get to see how deeply he impacted them and how he continues to like have that effect on them, because they're all horrified that Tenma gets arrested, and they try to put together like a legal team to try and bail him out, you know,
right.
That kind of stuff was so heartwarming.
Well, this also kind of speaks to another one of Naoki Urasawa's strengths, which is just the sort of consistency of the world, in that he both never forgets a character and also allows a big sprawling plot to occur and for characters to have very like interconnected backstories with each other. One of the most important things about Monster is the fact that everything is so related, and you get small little glimpses, right? You see 2 points that are like, oh, these 2 things are related, and then you realize, oh, these 2 things are related, and then you realize, oh, these like 3 things are related, and they're not all necessarily directly related to each other, but you see the threads throughout, right? So you have...
Yeah.
What was I say? You have things like Grimmer showing up, and turns out that he is a child from Kinderheim 511.
Yes.
And then you have Roberto, who...
That's who I was going to bring up.
Yeah,
Roberto.
Say, like, Roberto, who is the nephew of the Czechoslovakian secret police guy, right? And
yes.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
He was, for the majority of the story, he is like one of the worst antagonists. He's just like a killing machine for Johann. And it's only like kind of like towards the back half of the story that you learn about this person whom Grimmer remembers. And the thing about Kinderheim 511 is that they kind of erase the type of the person and your own identity. But what you do sometimes remember is the other people who were there, the other children. And so Grimmer remembers another boy there, and that boy loved hot chocolate. And in the very end of the story, at like the conclusion of Roberto's, you know, existence in the story, you learn that he's the boy with the hot chocolate. And the reason that he ends up attaching himself to Johann is because Johann gave him hot chocolate. And then that's also why he's not allowed apparently to see the doomsday scenario, is because he's not an empty nihilistic husk that Johann would want to see the doomsday scenario, is that he has that memory of hot chocolate, and that's why he can't see it, and that's why he's... It's amazing how interconnected even like this dude whom you has been left a mystery the entire time, just one little point of connection.
Yeah, I mean, everything feels so intimately connected, and also like when you trace those like lines and you see them and you like understand what's happening, it just gives everything just that little extra bit of meaning, because you're like, oh, yeah, he's that guy's nephew, right?
Yeah, whom Tenma meets. Tenma meets the guy, and then the guy is like, you know, like, I had this nephew who was, you know, I never got to see again.
So do we want to move into talking about the big thing, like the big sort of central tenet, the central themes of Monster?
We have to.
As I said, because we've talked quite at length about the craft of Monster, which is like it's so well put together, and the panels flow so well, right?
Yeah.
Even though they're, I think this is really fascinating because the panels aren't particularly like interestingly shaped or anything, right? It's not like they have any real quality to them other than the fact that they are rectangles, but that like somehow Naoki Urasawa can manipulate that into becoming so invisible and also so visible when he wants it to be, right? You just feel this very particular rhythm when you read it.
Yes, I think he is quite masterful at that, and to the point that like I thought this a lot while I was reading it, is that more so than you reading the manga, it feels like you're almost watching a movie. That's how well paced and cinematic a lot of his panels are.
I 100% agree. I think that there is a lot of film sort of influence there. And I think what's interesting is it reminds me a lot of when I was reading Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man, in sort of direct panel to panel rhythm, nails it at like pretty much in a very similar, or like if not exactly the same way that that Urasawa nails the rhythm of a manga panel. It's like both of these people understand like the process of reading manga and of telling a story through manga so well. And I would say also, like, the one time that the panels get a little bit, like, weirder, a little wonkier is when Nina is having, like, a dream sequence, right? And immediately you can feel like, oh, whoa, something is
something
off.
feels different, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's really, really good. But the themes of Monster, oh boy.
Everything feeds into the themes, which is great, which is how this type of story should be crafted, right? It's very strongly thematic, strong ideologies going on. So many ideologies at work and clashing.
I love it. I love it because
it's so good.
Naoki Urasawa reminds me this is really funny. He reminds me a lot of Tatsuki Fujimoto in that they both have like these really interesting perspectives on the human condition, so to speak. And I think that Chainsaw Man is a little bit more nihilistic, not necessarily in a less empathetic way, but I think that Naoki Urasawa feels just so much more hopeful in terms of like what it means to be a person, and I think that largely comes down to a generational gap. Now, obviously, Monster was serialized in 1994, right? So that is like well into the economic bust of Japan, right? This is around the time the kind of like the forgotten generation, or like the lost generation. I remember what it's called in Japan. Kind of came to be, where like the economic crash happened and it basically just ruined the futures of like an entire generation of people. And I think it is really, especially if you look at the tail end of the 20th century, I think it is not a coincidence by any means that the story is set around that time, around the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall, because it really speaks to this very specific, overarching kind of anxiety about the future of humanity, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, when you are at this point in time where you have, you know, capitalism and socialism, and capitalism has won, the Berlin Wall has fallen, and all traces of socialism have essentially been, like, you know, wiped away, right? What you get is, like, a bunch of people for whom capitalism is not the system that they wanted to live under, but it is now the system that they are forced to live under, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that socialism was better, but you can feel in a lot of the characters throughout Monster, the overarching kind of feeling is this anxiety of like, well, they said my life would get better after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and this was very prominent for people that lived in East Germany, right? Where they're like, but it hasn't, actually. In some ways, my life has actually gotten worse.
Right, yeah.
And that feels like kind of he takes this idea of like being anxious about the future, right? About seeing nothing but darkness in the future, and he like pulls it out, and he kind of speaks to a broader sort of sense of nihilism and of fear, and like, yeah, you get it, because like the 90s and early 2000s were one hell of a time for the planet, right? Like, obviously, the preceding years after World War I, awful. After World War II, awful, right? Throughout the entirety of the 20th century, there was this, like, really uneasy sense, aside from maybe the, like, 50s and 60s if you were, like, a white person, right? Like, maybe that point you would feel, like, really comfortable and, like, I was great. I live in a home with a white picket fence and my dog and my
the
children.
The American dream.
Right, the American dream. And how real that ideal ever was, obviously, is something to be called into question, not even just for the white person in America, but not even just for, the marginalized people in America who obviously were never able to access that, but even for the people for whom that would have been the stated ideal, right? Is like, was that ever realistic? Yeah. But I would say that what's about Monster specifically, you get this really interesting depiction that is both kind of universalizing and also very deeply personal.
Yeah, I love that, actually, because it does feel like you as a person, even though you're not living in 1980s Germany or whatnot, like, you can relate to the story in a way, because it is about this conflict between giving in to hopelessness and nihilism and accepting that nothing matters, there's no value anywhere, versus like wanting to be hopeful and look towards the future. And I love that this story personifies that within the conflict between Tenma and Johan. He literally picked the like I feel like the perfect point in history and location wise, like all of that, to just draw out this very specific conflict. And of course, there's like a lot of themes that are generated from that as well. But to have that as the main core conflict, I think, is brilliant. The way that he portrays, and also like the fact that like Johan is such a force of just like nihilism is in a way, because of its like they describe his ideologies a lot of the time in the story as being very pure, and that's what gravitates a lot of people to him. It's like it's such a he has such pure intentions, so to speak, of obliteration, essentially.
Right.
At first standing on top, and then he's like, no, I want everything erased, right? And then Tenma is a lot shakier, and I feel like that's, like it's going to be a direct reflection of how you feel, how you would feel during these times, or during any kind of troubling time, is like, you might want to cling on to a more hopeful idealism, but you don't know whether it's gonna come true. You don't know what the fallout is from that. And Tenma very early on experiences that type of fallout when he saves the titular monster, so to speak. He saves Johan's life, and Johan becomes, is a murderer.
I would also say that I think one of the most interesting conflicts in the entire series is Dr. Tenma, because he is, to Johan's sort of pure nihilism and pure destruction, he is this foil that is pure humanism, right? All human lives are equal, and he will help anybody that he can, right? And so his sort of central conflict for a lot of the series is like I did this essentially, right? Because if I didn't save Johan, this would never have happened. Like all of these events never would have transpired, right? And he takes it upon himself to remedy this problem by killing him, right? And this conflict of like, you know, Dr. Tenma is a surgeon, you know, he is a person that saves lives, and his mission for most of the series is to kill somebody, right? And he finds that time and time again, it's so difficult for him to kill Johan, and it is so difficult for him to, you know, really harm anybody, even when, you know, he's in situations where it would make sense. Like the only real time that he like actually, you know, harms somebody and like thinks he killed them is when he shoots Roberto and he like falls into the exploding fire, right? He's like, oh god, I killed somebody, and it turns out he didn't, right? And you watch the whole series play out and you're like, what's gonna happen? Like, is he going to do it? Is he going to kill? Like, how does this work within the framework of like a humanist philosophy of like saving lives, right? It forces him to consider like maybe not all lives are equal, right? And I think one of the remarkable things is it would have been very simple just to have you know, Dr. Tenma be like, okay, but this is like for the best, for the best of humanity, and he does it, right? And like he doesn't, and in fact the characters say like, don't do this. You weren't wrong to save Johan, and you're not wrong to not want to shoot him now, right? And like, I think that there are a couple of ways that you could interpret it, but the way that, you know, the way that I see it is that, you know, Dr. Tenma still sees Johan as human, right? The thing about the series being titled Monster is the entire time you are looking for a monster, and you see like monstrous action after monstrous action. You see murders, and you see children being experimented on, and you know, you're like, the whole time you're just like, oh, like this is like Johan's doing, and then like you're like, oh, this is like the Czechoslovakian like government's doing for setting up Kinderheim 511, and like the people who set up the experiment, and you follow this entire thread, and at the end of it, you see the guy who started the Kinderheim 511 experiments, who's like, I brainwashed these children to remove every aspect of their humanity, like I took away their names, the very things that make them human. And you see him, and he's like just a guy now. And
not only that, is that he doesn't even believe in the experiment anymore.
He believes that, you know, that people are worth being people, right? Like he doesn't believe in this like, oh, we have to raise the glorious, perfectly logical, you know, the Ubermensch to lead humanity. It's like you see him after all these years in just like a random tiny town in Germany, and he's like, oh, don't worry, kids. Like, he's like just talking to a kid, and he's just like, don't hurt people.
He's the nice old innkeeper who they don't reveal who he is right away, but he's the nice old innkeeper who's comforting Wim and preventing Wim from becoming a violent person. Like Wim's at that is this little boy who's at this turning point in his life where he has like a lot of, you know, conflict in his personal life. He has, you know, a really terrible alcoholic and violent father. He's got bullies. He's got all of these forces around him that are pushing him towards reacting to them, right? Like fighting back, you know, doing something terrible. And it's this old innkeeper who is keeping Wim grounded, having him work at the inn, you know, like comforting him whenever, like, you know, he's being harassed by bullies, you know, telling him not to mind them, that kind of thing. It turns out this old innkeeper who is like keeping Wim grounded in humanity and being a good person is the person who was the head of the experimentation at Kinderheim 511, who had, you know, the twins separated and had this had one of them subjected to like such really awful trauma. But he's already changed. He's already a different person. And not only that, he doesn't believe what Johan became, right? Like he's not he's not like Johan.
And I would say like most of the people who worked in that institution basically just like grow out of it, right? The guy Mikhail Petrov, who is known as Reinhard Biermann, is one of the guys who was at Kinderheim 511, and he, when we find him, has just started an orphanage and is taking care of a bunch of orphans, and he's not brainwashing them, right? And he has to justify this to himself, right? He's like, oh, this is an experiment, right? This is an experiment, just like Kinderheim 511. But like deep down, like you can just tell that he's just changed his mind, right? And like all this time you're looking for this monster, and all you see are just people that have done monstrous things, right? Even Johan, who is this like embodiment of destruction and nihilism and the end of the world, is like, he got that way because he listened to Nina, right? Because he absorbed everything about Nina so that she wouldn't have to remember it, right? The thing is that, every character from Kinderheim 511 that we see has been raised in this very certain way to become these like perfectly like logical nihilistic machines. And you see the way that plays out in Johan, who is like the idealized version of this. And you see Roberto, who is still a little bit imperfect. He still has some of these worldly attachments. And you see Grimmer, who by the end of the series becomes human again, right? He retakes his humanity, right? He's like, I have, now that I'm at my deathbed and I've been trying for so long, for so hard, like I feel sad about the death of my son. I didn't feel this way before, right? And he gets buried, and he has a tombstone. He has a grave that says Grimmer on it. He has been given a name, right? Yeah. Names are a very big thing in Monster, because they are essentially a marker of humanity, right? We're a social species, and we need ways to refer to each other, right? Names are such an essentially like human thing. And
right, yeah. They make a really important note of focusing around identity. So you see this mainly in the struggle between Johan and also partly Nina too, because she also has a struggle between like, am I Nina? Am I Anna? Am I like who am I? And then Johan as well conflates himself with the nameless monster. He's like, his name, quote unquote, is Johan, but that is from the Nameless Monster storybook. But ultimately he also refers to Nina as his other self. So you can tell that at multiple points he's confused his identity for a lot of different things, even to the point that, like you mentioned before, he takes on Nina's memories from the Red Rose Mansion, and makes them his own. And I think that's one of the main reasons why they have that identity crisis, or that not identity crisis, but that him having kind of an ethereal identity is because identity is tied to his humanity, and he is, throughout a large part of the story, portrayed as being rather inhuman.
Right.
Yes, because he lacks identity.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that he is this essential wonder child of Kinderheim 511, right? He is the great success, and it is because they have erased everything that is a person about him. And the thing is that, obviously the picture book, the monster without a name, you get this, very, thinly veiled allegory about Johan and Nina. And you see, like, names are so important, and even for characters that don't come out of Kinderheim 511 necessarily, or like not just the children, right? General Wolf when he's on his deathbed, asks Dr. Tenma to say his name as proof that he existed, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you kind of see this thematic through line of your name being proof that you existed, and how complicated that is for characters like Grimmer and for like Roberto and for especially for Johann and Nina, right? He was named Johann presumably by General Wolf, who saw the picture book Wolf. That they were holding, right?
And what I think is even more, points more to that is the fact that their mother, you find out, is alive, and she had names for them. She was never able to give it to them. And so even though Tenma knows Johann's, I think he finds out Johann's name from her, he isn't able to give it to Johann. You know,
so actually, I read it completely differently. I think he does.
You think he does? Oh, okay.
So this is what I read from the last couple pages, right? So what happens is he's talking to Johann, who is in a coma after he's been, resurgeried by Tenma. And
he got shot in the head again, and then Tenma saved him again.
And then Tenma has this fever dream where Johann is talking to him. About the situation with the mother, was I given away because I was unwanted? What about me was unwanted? Was I being mistaken for my sister? He just doesn't know, right? And then Tenma, and this is what I say is you don't see it directly, but I think what happens is he says you have a name. And I think in the panels we don't see, he says what that name is, because to us it doesn't matter what his name is. But what happens then is the very last panel is the empty bed, right? Johann has disappeared, and I think that is symbolic of both Johann disappearing and of the concept of Johann as this embodiment of a non-person disappearing, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way that I read that, and
I like that. Yeah,
that's the kind of that's the thematic operation that I see going on of
that makes sense. Yeah,
Johann is this personification of nihilism, and you can see in the way that he talks to people and essentially brainwashes them into a lot of time doing things for him or just straight up killing themselves, right? And a lot of the times it's because he can talk to people and inflict them with the darkness that he sees, right? The inevitable heat death of the universe. And and I think that is a very real struggle for people, but also a very prescient threat at the point in time that this was being serialized. And to a large extent, still now, I would say that a lot of people struggle with this. This is the whole doomerism thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I think it's interesting because he comes out of Kinderheim 511, which is this state-run sort of socialist child experiment institution. And you also see he is being, I say he's being used, right? He's really using the far right neo-Nazi organization, and I think that's very interesting because I think it means that Naoki Urasawa has a very good understanding of what Nazism kind of is as an ideology and what it leads to, right? It leads to nihilism, right? When the characters in the in Monsters say the people at the neo-Nazi organization, they don't understand what they're doing. They don't understand that this is bigger than them, right? It's that they don't understand that at the end of the road of or at the end of the road of Nazism, of fascism, and of race science, right, and of white supremacy is nihilism. It's a self-destructive ideology because what happens, right, in white supremacy is you have white people, a sort of constructed, fabricated identity of white people are the best people or whatever, right? And the thing about white supremacy is it just doesn't work because of course it doesn't, right? White people are a minority on the planet, really, right? They're not the majority of humankind, and nothing says that they're special in any particular way, right? Realistically speaking, but people have to invent this sort of stuff so that it works in line with their own, conception of the world, of like, this is how we got colonialism. And the thing is that at the end of white supremacy is like self-destruction. It's nihilism. It's total annihilation, because once you run out of people to scapegoat, you'll find someone else to scapegoat, right? It's
going to be one of your own.
This is the like literally the most famous poem about fascism is like, first they came for, the X, and then I didn't speak out because I was not part of that group, and then they came for, and then by the time they came for me, there was no one left to speak for me, right? The thing is, they'll always find something, right? He's like, there must always be a conspiracy. It's a losing ideology because it's a self-destructive one. And most of the characters kind of realize this, because they're like, you're not using nihilism to achieve your goals. Nihilism is using you to get to the end state of nihilism, right?
Yes. The way that the neo-Nazi groups and the people trying to use Johann in the story are treated is that they feel like they have everything to gain from raising up Johann as, in their own words, as like the next Hitler, right?
Right.
And they are constantly warned by legitimately like everyone in the story, including Tenma many times, that this is not gonna work. You are incapable of using Johann. It's not gonna work the way that you want it. You, as desperately as you want things, as you want the clock to be rewound back to when you were like winning the war, to before the wall fell, so on and so forth, right? Like, as much as you want that to happen, you can't rewind the clock back to your quote unquote glory days. And no matter what, if you keep walking down this road where you keep trying to find Johann, you're going to meet destruction, because that is what he is. He is destruction.
Yeah, and I would also say, like, I think the really brilliant thing is that Johann is, for most of the series, the primary antagonist. He's this embodiment of nihilism and of destruction. And you wonder the whole time, you're like, was Dr. Tenma right to save him? And and at the end, you see the process of Johann, like, getting to become a human again, right? And like, there's this like philosophy that just runs throughout the entire series about what it means to be human, right? And what it means to be a monster. And like, at the end of the day, it's like monsters don't exist, right? It's just people doing people things. And some of those things are monstrous, but nobody is ever universally a monster. Even Roberto, who is like, very close to like the most we get, is like humanized in these ways where he's like, he was a child that was brainwashed, and he liked bugs, but he didn't like killing bugs, and he liked hot chocolate so much. And as much as they try to kind of erase all of these things, they eventually, the brainwashing eventually kind of like peels away, and you see that there's still human elements to these people. And like, it's not an excuse for the things that they have done and the atrocities that they've committed, but it is very clear that Urasawa and Tenma still regard them as humans, and that it is a part of being human to rationalize the fact that people do terrible things for various different reasons, whether it's ideology or whether it's because of whatever the case may be, whatever the situation may be. And I also think that you can see this when you go and you look at all of the really just like cringe fail men in the series, right? There are so many men who have so many problems being people, right? The vast majority of the men are like, they're awful. They like are obsessed with their jobs, or they can't express their feelings. And the process of reading Monster is the process of watching a lot of these people just get better, right? Like, you have Richard Brown, who we see in this stage of healing and growth, where he is battling his alcoholism, and we see the criminal psychologist who went to college with Dr. Tenma. I don't remember exactly. It was like I don't remember exactly what his name is, but we see his arc of like realizing that Tenma didn't hate him, like that was just something he projected onto him, and them essentially coming to be on the same side. And you see like all of these men who have been terrible to their families learning what it means to be a part of a family and to communicate the things that they care about and to become integrated into society again. And it's like, you can't just be obsessed with your job. Like, you have to be a human, right? And like, you see this with all of these guys that have been left by their wives, and also Inspector Lunga, whose wife also left him because he was obsessed with his job.
Yeah, essentially the story ends up being about humanism, and I feel like even with Johan, the story revolves around how it's not necessarily like death or being erased and whatnot that ends up saving you in the end. It's about connecting with your humanity, right? Like, we see it several times in the story, with many of the characters, like Martin, right? Ava's bodyguard.
Oh my god, what a heartbreaking sequence. It was so good.
It was so good. And yet he, unfortunately, like, he starts off the story, he's like the son of like of this mom who's alcoholic, and he always has to bring her home, and then one day, he doesn't bring her home and she freezes to death on the street, and he blames himself for that, for the rest of his life, and he also gets involved romantically with this girl who's a drug addict. Comes home, she is having like an affair with her ex in Martin and her bedroom. She wants Martin to get upset with her, to hate her and whatnot. He doesn't. She ends up shooting herself, and Martin ends up killing the ex, and then he becomes like this like bodyguard who just hates being around women just in general, just because of his past trauma, right? And then he gets involved with Ava, and then he, through his interactions with her, and knowing that she's going to die, he regains his humanity and puts his life on the line to try and save her. And that's, even though he ended up dying for it, he ended up getting that little piece of himself back, right? That he ended up getting something from that he thought that he had lost, right? And I feel like that type of theme is like so wonderfully strong throughout the story, right? You get it with Grimmer when he was, like you said, he couldn't mourn for his son before, but then by the end of the story he could. And then even with Johan too, like that's one of the reasons why I like your interpretation of the ending so much, is because like if he was given his name, then yeah, Tenma technically was successful in killing Johan, but also in saving him,
right,
at the same time, right? Like, he saved his life physically, but also like he saved his identity as well, and also killed the concept of Johan, the nameless monster, right? So he didn't have to necessarily give up his ideals in order to get rid of this concept of Johan.
I also think it's just such a perfectly put together story, such a perfectly constructed story for the kind of philosophy that's being displayed, right? Because it is one thing to have all of those things in isolation, and it's another thing entirely for that to be there in addition to having just so many people connected to each other, right? It's like exposing these invisible threads that connect everybody, right? It's like this reminder of the interconnectedness of human beings, and just how much that is so carefully depicted is such a like big appeal of the series, and of why that idea works, right? It's not just like, oh, I have to make up with the people that are immediately around me. It's that our lives are so interconnected, and we touch each other in ways that we might not even know. And like, even the characters that are like start out kind of like deeply unpleasant, you feel a sense of connection and attachment, and like maybe sometimes even some growth for them, right? Like, you know, for Martin, that process happens in a couple of chapters, but for Eva, who is like left behind by that, who has been here since the beginning, right,
bro,
you feel like that is a heartbreaking moment when she is sitting there at the train station waiting for him and he doesn't come, and it's like oh, you're like, until then, Eva has not been someone that you have rooted for or cared for in any meaningful way, because like she really screws over Tenma for a really long time, because she's like, I'm a material witness. I could definitely like testify that I saw Johan and that Tenma did not kill all those people, but I won't, because he ruined my life.
Yeah,
after I
ruined
dumped him.
Tenma's life. Yeah.
And you're like, okay, well, you're just being mean.
Yeah, she spends a lot of the story waffling. Like, do I want to destroy Tenma? Do I want to make sure he's okay? You know, that kind of thing.
But at the same time, like, it's so obvious that like, it's so obvious that she's still human, and at the end you can see how much Martin has affected her, and how much that has meant to her, like how happy she was just to be waiting for somebody, or like just to be waiting for somebody, right? Even if he never shows up. Exactly.
She was literally ready to die, because she knew at the end of that job that she was given, where Martin was assigned to be her bodyguard during it, that she was going to die. And she was just fully ready to accept that. But then because of her, you know, meeting Martin, and also like, you know, some influence that Tenma has had in her life, like Martin was able to give her something to look forward to, which was to see him at the train station. And he also, that's why he ends up defining it this, they end up defining it this way, is that happiness is knowing that someone is waiting for you, like at the train station, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they both were able to find that happiness, even though they weren't technically able to meet. And it was just so sad, but it was so good, because it just, it ends up like helping Ava find her motivation that goes beyond her obsession with Tenma. She has a motivation that is sprung up just from her, right? And it helps her move on as like a human being. And she ends up like finally resolving a lot of her issues. She feels a lot more certain about her identity. She knows like the kind of person that she, you know, wants to be, and she ends up like acting on that towards the end of the story, which is really nice. My gosh, we talked about so many things, and there's just so much to the story.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very, very masterful piece of work, I would say. I would be super curious to check out some of Urasawa's other works. I was in that position where obviously I knew that Urasawa was a very well-regarded mangaka, but I had never experienced anything that he has written. And it's funny because like I really avoided all the spoilers about what Monster was about, and also like, you know, I hadn't read it, obviously I didn't watch the anime.
Mm-hmm.
It really kind of exceeded my expectations, which I wasn't expecting to happen. I was expecting just to be like, yeah, I mean that was good. Like I can see why this was good, but like I was kind of blown away. If I'm going to be completely honest, I really, really adored just how much of a humanist story it was, and like, man, just like when a character dies in this series, it feels so like viscerally painful, right? When Grimmer dies and he's just like, I think at the end, like in the last episode, the Magnificent Steiner must have become a person, a human, right?
Yeah.
Like that entire sequence is so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And like the fact that you get to see someone reclaim their humanity after having it essentially programmed out of them, like this desire for people to connect with each other and to care for each other, and like essentially this battle against nihilism and hopelessness for the future, and of the terrible things that humans do and the terrible crimes that they commit. Being able to reconcile that with the humanist philosophy, saying like it is true that human beings are capable of really atrocious things, and that it's not the work of a monster, it's like it's us, it's human beings, and any monster that exists is something that we created, right? So like the monsters that come out of Kinderheim 511 are that way because they were created to be that way, and even then they still have every capacity to return to being human beings. And it doesn't excuse the crimes that they do, but they still get to be humans, and it's important that we regard them as such, right? The fact that the concept of Johann just disappears at the end is I think pretty indicative of that. He becomes human again, right? The monster,
everything in the story, even Johann, like all of it points to humanism.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to sort of call the episode there and say that if you have gotten to this point and you haven't read it, I would highly recommend reading it. Because
it's just one of a kind. It's I mean, we're talking like about how like it feels kind of classic. Like I feel like it is a classic in terms of like manga history or whatnot.
Yeah, I would say it definitely deserves that title.
Yeah. You know what? I forgot this fact about Monster, but during its last 2 years of serialization, Urasawa was also serializing 20th Century Boys.
Oh my god. Wait, that's
apparently
crazy.
He got hospitalized during that time too because he was so exhausted. And it's like, yeah, no wonder. You were creating 2 masterpieces at one time. We might end up. I mean, I do want to read 20th Century Boys for the podcast.
Sure.
At some point.
Yeah, I would totally be down.
Yeah.
I mean, I really enjoyed Monster. I was also not sure, and in hindsight, this is kind of a silly thing to say, but I really wasn't sure how I was going to feel about Monster as a manga, right? As a piece of manga. And I'm happy to report that Naoki Urasawa really is just like so next level in terms of the information that he is able to convey in a relatively straightforward way. You said earlier that it felt a lot like watching a film, and I definitely agree. I think that the film-like quality to it is because, like, he knows what information to include and when to include it, and he understands the sequence in which it should be given to you, right? And the weight that every action should have, right? The fact that the little character ticks are not these big, like, block spreads on a page, but like very tiny, intimate details is like a part of what makes it so easy to feel like you're connecting with them on this like very deep, intimate level.
Yeah, I feel like that is probably one of the reasons that lends itself to such an effective anime adaptation, is because of the way that he crafted the story in that like very easily translatable movie-like quality, right? Of course, I'm sure the animation studio itself did an amazing job with adapting it, but like it really does translate super well, and I think a lot of that that work started with Urasawa because it's just that, like, you can just see it playing out in your mind the way that he's crafted the story.
Right. I also feel like I would not be surprised if the 1995 Shinrikyo attacks had anything to do with the kind of tone of the manga. Because that happened about a year into serializing. I wonder if that had any sort of effect on the story. It most certainly probably will show up in 20th Century Boys if we do end up reading it. Because it started serialization a little bit later. But it kind of does feel quite in line with that, right? Like this idea that we were hurtling towards this nihilistic darkness, the sort of darkness that lies at the end of humanity, right? And I will say that is another thing that I really like about Monster. I know we said we were gonna wrap up, but another thing that I really like about Monster is this kind of refutation of both of the like sort of fascist ideal, you know, the Ubermensch ideal, but also this idea that, you know, people should be perfectly cold and logical all the time, right? All of that strips away all of being human, and it ultimately leads to nihilism, right? It leads to this place where the end of the world happens because, like, if you can't care for another person, if caring for other people is illogical, then the logical conclusion, right, is going to be the end of everything, right? And
yeah,
I feel like also for that idea specifically, there must be something there about the turn of the 21st, like the 20th or the 21st century, and the rising sort of aspect of isolation that people feel in society. There has to be an element of that, right?
Sure.
Because
I also, I think it's because of the placement of the writing. Like, I think that, plus the fact that, like, around the time, like while Monster was probably being developed, was like people were still like that was like only like 4-ish years or whatnot after Akira ended, right? So you see this kind of like ripple effect of like themes and whatnot, like that type of like, are we approaching the end or the beginning? Like,
right, like what is it? Like
what's over the horizon?
The turn of the 20th to the 21st century is one of the most interesting times to study, simply because we have such a wealth of media from that time that will implicitly clue us in to the attitudes of people, right?
Yes.
And like, also, it was a really fucking crazy time, right? You have the Shinrikyo attacks in Japan. In America, you have 9/11 happening in 2001. Like, this is a time that is quite shaking. I would say quite shocking for the foundation of you know, liberal democratic society. And the question as to whether we've ever recovered from these things, it stands to be seen, I would say. But yeah, I mean, that's I think that's all I gotta say for now. You know what? Actually, all that stuff I talked about the turn of the 21st century, the 20th to 21st century, probably does get addressed in 20th Century Boys, now that I think about it. It's literally titled 20th Century Boys.
It's in the title, yeah. Mayhaps.
All right, well then. I guess on that note, who are you and where can we find you on the internet?
Hey, I am Renu, also known as Swan. You can find me on Instagram at swan.drawn. You can find me on Twitch and Twitter, everywhere else at swandrawn. I will be absent for the holidays and a little bit after, as I will be at a convention, and then by the time we come back and record some more, I'll be back. So I believe by the time that this releases, I'll probably still be away, but that's okay. We
Fair
all
enough.
need vacation sometimes. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah.
Well, you can find me all places at Literal Soup. If I am on a place, I am there. And that is becoming increasingly relevant now that, Twitter might not exist in like a year. Who knows? But
Who knows?
As always, if you want to find me at Literal Soup, most places. Yep, I'm not up to anything too extremely exciting for the most part for the foreseeable future. I'm really just going to be deep in the podcast mines, I think, for like until probably the end of January. But I would like to get back to doing some personal projects, and some streaming would be nice. I have not played any more of Pokemon Violet because I want to save it for stream, but it's a new Pokemon generation, so like I gotta play it.
I hope you have fun with it.
Yeah. So anyway, well, that is it. That is the last proper episode for the year. The next episode will be the wrap up episode for the I shouldn't say wrap up, because that makes it sound like it's a seasonal episode. It will be the anniversary episode.
Yeah, I was
where
gonna
we'll
say.
talk about anniversary stuff, and hopefully it comes out
Yes.
before the end of the year, which I don't even know if this episode is going to come out before the end of the year.
Yeah, I don't know if you should make your future self promises.
We're all just hoping here. But whenever you hear this, once again, thank you so much for listening. I know it got a little dicey there at the end
Thank you.
in the middle of the year, but thanks for sticking with us.
Yeah, this has been great. I hope you enjoyed the discussion today. I sure did. This is one of my favorite works of all time, and I'm glad we get to talk about this stuff on the podcast, like new stuff, old stuff, all of that good stuff.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, as always, our opening is by Scott2 Network, and our ending is by Takamakata. And the patrons we are thanking this episode are Evan Williams, Magpie Minutes, Claire, Frostfall, Shandao, Cherubel, and Dylan Boats. Thank you so much for the support.
Thank you. It's awesome.
Do you want to know a fun fact that I just realized? I don't remember if we talked about this in the anniversary episode, but the opening of our podcast still assumes it's a weekly podcast. Have you noticed this?
The
It
opening?
says, yeah, hello everyone and welcome to the Acast, a podcast for studying modern visual culture. I'm blank and I'm your blank, and I'm blank, you're blank. This week stands
this
for
week.
blank because this
That's your
week.
fault.
Oh,
That's your fault. You did that.
wow, you actually took it out of this episode. Wow, I'm gonna go change.
I did?
Or at the very least, maybe I did, because it's not part of this episode, but I will have to change the template for the
you
guide.
have to change it. You set us up for disaster.
Oh yeah, no, hold on. It's still here. It says this week at stands for.
Yeah, it still says it there.
Okay, this week at stands for. Okay, well I'll change that in my time.
We could say this episode.
This episode it almost feels wrong at this point,
What do you mean?
because we've been saying this week for so long.
Well, too bad. We gotta fix
Yeah,
it.
it's not accurate anymore. Okay, all right. Anyway, thank you so much for listening.
Thank
and
you.
We will see you next time.
See you next time.
さようなら。また明日ね。